the Justice Department is suing President Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, over the release of his upcoming book. It is published, and it will be released next week. It's published by Simon & Schuster, which, as a reminder, is a division of Viacom CBS. So we want to bring in Paula Reid now to talk about the latest coming out of the White House. Paula, what's the Justice Department's main complaint? Because as I understand it, these books, typically don't get published unless they've already gotten a once-over from the White House or the Justice Department.
Well, we know, Anne-Marie, there has been a review process, but the question at issue is whether that review process had concluded before these books were shipped to the warehouse. And yesterday, the Justice Department filed this suit asking a judge to block this book from being published. It's expected to be published next week, and also possibly try to put all of the proceeds from this book in a trust. Now, the Justice Department argues that Ambassador Bolton participated in the review process looking for any classified information that he may have included, but then they claim that he became, quote, dissatisfied at the pace of the review and, quote, decided to take matters into his own hands. So what they're asking the court to force is for him to hold off on publishing this book and to continue the review process. So we'll see what the judge says here, but it's not just the book. I mean, the book is sitting in warehouses. There are people who we believe who have copies. He's already sat for media interviews, and it's not clear that the court would have any authority to keep a network from airing that interview where he discusses the contents of this book.
Yeah, that was going to be my question to you, Paula. I mean, the book's already out there. Could a judge potentially, even if a judge were able to stop the book from being released, it's already in the hands of distributors. Is there anything legally that can be done at this point?
That's right. The book is in the warehouses. It appears that if they believe that horse has left the barn, instead they're going to try to target the profits of this book. They're asking the court to create a, quote, constructive trust on any profits that are obtained. But it does appear, though, that they may need to tie that claim to proof that he actually mishandled classified information. And so far, he and his attorneys insist that he went through the review process, that he removed any, quote, national security concerns from it, and that there shouldn't be an issue. Now, his lawyer said last night that they're reviewing it. They'll respond in due course. But in my previous conversations with his attorney, Chuck Cooper, Cooper told me that, yeah, they went through the process. They believe they made necessary accommodations. But then we know the Justice Department actually learned the book was going to be published. It was supposed to be published a while back, but they learned it was going to be published next week through media reports. And then his lawyer says they started getting additional correspondence from the White House suggesting that the current manuscripts still contain classified information. But his publisher right now is standing by him, saying they protect his First Amendment right to publish this. They're saying that this is just a, quote, long-running series of efforts by the administration to quash an unflattering book. So it doesn't appear that the publisher is going to hand over those books too readily. It'll be really interesting to see the outcome of this case. I don't think it's going to be, it's unlikely that the government's going to get everything they want, but they're going to have to provide some proof that this is more than just a thinly veiled threat. And if nothing else, taking this out of the legal arena, this is getting a lot of attention for this book.
All right, so let's flip back to the topic that started this whole show, police reform. The president signed an executive order yesterday. Of course, some people are applauding him for the executive order. Others are critical of it, saying it doesn't go far enough. The acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, was actually on CBS this morning, and he addressed the executive order. Let's play a little of that.
I think the president's shown in his demonstrated leadership on this initiative. It's a tough issue, but it's one that, again, through the executive order, there's a number of things in there that pushes this issue forward. And as you indicated at the top of your segment, the president said yesterday he's willing to work with Congress, Tim Scott and others in the Senate and the House to continue these reforms. If Congress wants to put additional measures in there, the president and the administration is certainly open to that.
And we heard from Tim Scott and the other senators just in less than an hour ago, and it was clear that they were definitely sort of careful about their wording when they talked about the president. They did not want to be critical of some of his law and order messaging that we've been hearing up until this point. What would the president working with Congress look like?
Well, the president signaled yesterday that he is now willing to work with Congress. We have to remember that this executive order is not legally binding. The government has not tied any federal funding to cooperation with this order. They're merely encouraging police departments to adopt better accountability standards. So if anything is truly going to change in accountability, it needs to go through Congress. It needs to be an actual law and a law that the president will sign. And you heard in that press conference, it did not appear that they have the president's endorsement for their proposal, though they were hoping that they will get it. But to the secretary's comments there saying that the president's executive order does move this issue forward, the question is what issue? Yesterday's executive order made no mention of racial bias. It made no attempt to address that issue or how to fix it. We've pressed other senior administration officials who work directly on this executive order. No one has been able to articulate how they plan to address that specific issue, which has sent thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans to the streets over the past 3 weeks in an uproar over the death of George Floyd and a demand to address racial disparity in law enforcement. So far, that issue has not been addressed by the president or by this executive order.
The other thing, Paula, before we let you go, and something you perhaps heard us talking to Nancy Cordes about, but I'm curious for the White House perspective. Again, yesterday, the President of the United States said that President Obama and Vice President Biden did nothing for police reform during the 8 years they were in office. That's simply not true, and I know you fact-checked this as well. But just again, I pointed out the 1033 order that the President rescinded to allow police departments to receive military equipment, something that the Trump administration rolled back. The other thing that I pointed out, now tap your lawyerly skills here, which is these 25 investigations that the Obama administration opened into police departments to see whether they were engaged in a pattern or practice of misconduct. That's 25 investigations. In comparison, the DOJ under President Trump has so far only had one investigation, and they've signed only 2 agreements that were based on investigations that started when President Obama was in office. So again, the president, seemingly reaching out to Americans and saying that he wants to see some kind of reform while attacking the previous administration and saying that they didn't do anything, which is clearly false.
Absolutely. It's completely a lie to say that the Obama administration did not try to pursue police reform. And not only did the president say that, but then his press secretary went on Fox News a short time later and doubled down on that. So it wasn't just a slip of the tongue. I covered the Obama Justice Department as well as the Trump Justice Department. And you are right. The Obama Justice Department opened more than 24 federal investigations looking at various law enforcement agencies across this country, trying to identify any civil rights abuses, patterns or practices of racially discriminating police practices. They did that in Ferguson. They did that in Baltimore. They did that in Chicago. They also used a sort of community-based resources, trying to build trust through their COPS office. As you noted, they also tried to reduce the sale of some military equipment to police officers, and they did a lot of funding for body cams for officers. Much of that was rolled back by Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the Trump Justice Department. Now, what's interesting is it does look like they may be trying to bring some of those reforms back, specifically funding for body cameras, but you're absolutely right. The previous 3 presidents, both parties have opened nearly 70 federal investigations into police departments. The Trump administration has opened just 1. That is into a discrete issue in Springfield, Massachusetts, into that police department's narcotics unit. So it's clear, it appears that the Justice Department under this administration, federal oversight of racially biased policing has not been a priority. Now, our Margaret Brennan did ask the Attorney General about this, and he dismissed it. He said that he's not interested in gestures and that he wants to try to build trust between the community and police. But again, those pattern and practice investigations are an enormous tool. While publicly some police unions may dismiss them, I talked to many officers across this country who had been through it or were going through it, and many of them would tell me actually they appreciated when the federal government got involved because often they could get resources, be it computers, be it training, all kinds of things that they couldn't get from their local government. It's not that they wanted to not follow the best standards, it's that they didn't have the resources, and sometimes that federal oversight is exactly what they needed to get what they needed to do their job safely.
It's such a great point that you make, Paula. And, I remember when I was covering the protests in Ferguson, when Attorney General Eric Holder came to Ferguson what that meant to the people who were taking to the streets every night to see the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the country appearing there in Ferguson to talk to the police, to talk to the mayor, to talk to the governor. It was a real powerful moment. I'm still waiting, I'm guessing, for Bill Barr to appear in Minneapolis or in Atlanta or in any other places that are seeing
well, Vlad, I mean, you make an important point, Vlad. I mean, I think what's interesting is both administrations sort of missed the opportunity to address both sides of this equation. Because I remember Holder was criticized often for not being more supportive of law enforcement or for not visiting law enforcement officers, but visiting victims. And some people told me that they believe that he was sort of tipping his cards in terms of his feelings about law enforcement. Now we have Bill Barr. We had Attorney General Jeff Sessions. These are folks who skewed it completely the other way, almost reactionary, really only supporting law enforcement and not being really willing to address this issue of racial bias. And as you guys talked about with Nancy in the earlier segment, it does appear there is a middle ground that no one is really willing to stake, which is what it will ultimately take to bring these two sides together for a conversation to implement reforms to make policing more safe, not only for communities, but also for police officers.
Such a great point. Love talking to you, Paula, because I know that you were a lawyer in a former life, and it just fits into the analysis and the reporting that we're doing around this very important issue. Paula Reid at the White House for us. Paula, we appreciate it.